Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hold on, I gotta close my door.
Why do I feel like? Hi everyone. We'll be starting in just a minute, as normal.
As I do a giant shot of vodka.
Yep. Gotta get through the show somehow. I should probably put my computer on priority only. Oh, I should open up the chats as well.
I should open these websites.
Philip says, "How are you?" We're all right. How are you? I am live. Yep. There we go. Just moving all my windows around. Why is that there? That doesn't need to be there. Goodbye.
Yeah, come on.
Are we going to talk about the Spotify spotter mode thing? I have no idea what that's in regards to.
If you were on today's call, you would have.
I wasn't.
I know. We can briefly mention it, yeah.
Zach ready to hit the town after the show. Not
It is
exactly.
Friday. It's funny, I'm going out to dinner with my best friend tonight because I haven't seen him all since
on Valentine's Day? How cute.
I know. You realize like him and I are both going to a restaurant on Valentine's Day. And it's just like
we're just
we
bros,
are BFFs.
Man. We're just bros. Two bros going out to dinner on Valentine's Day. Nothing wrong with that.
Jesus.
Seriously, iPhone on loud? Who are you?
Yeah,
No iPhone user has their phone on loud.
that was a little loud.
Right.
Look at this back of my Fitbit this week.
Look
It's
at
crazy.
you telling Google everything about you.
Yes. Exactly it. All right. Let me fire that tweet off.
My computer's really like just being slow. What's happening here? 100% CPU. That's probably not good. I'll have to deal with it. All right, I'm ready to go, and you are.
You want to retweet the tweet?
Yeah, that's a good idea actually. Retweeted. There we go.
Yeah, I am now recording.
I am now recording as well.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 165 for January. Oh, I screwed it up. I forgot to change the date.
Oh, I'll stop my recording.
Yeah, I'll do that too, I guess. All right, let's try that one more time. All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 165 for February 14th, 2020. Hey everyone, Dan Rubino here, joined with Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast, where we discuss all things Microsoft Windows, Surface, Xbox, and whatever cool tech is out there. Maybe we'll even mention that Galaxy Z Flippy thing that came out today, actually. This week, though, we're going to be mostly focusing on Windows 10X, as we got to finally see that OS in action as the emulator was released publicly, and Microsoft gave a nice little presentation on how it all works, and Zach will tell us what's cool about it, and I'll tell you a little bit about Win32 containers and what containers are, why it's cool, and then Zach and I will high-five each other and tell you why this is actually a UWP operating system and UWP isn't dead, and then we'll have other people challenge us on that. That'd be fun. Well, let's talk about Mobile World Congress being canceled, which is a pretty big shame. Although it's funny because all journalists who cover it are like, yay, Mobile World Congress is canceled. But it's actually kind of it's unfortunate for Barcelona, who relies a lot on this event and what it means, whether or not it can go on next year and all this kind of stuff. I'm just glad because I had a conflicting flight issue that I didn't want to resolve because it's going to cost a lot of money, and now I don't have to. Well, I'll talk about the Galaxy Book S being available. I still don't have one, but I am getting one. But we'll talk a little bit about that and more. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Valentine's Day?
I'm actually really happy because we know everything about Windows 10X now. Well, most things about Windows 10X. It's finally happened. It's like we've been talking about this stuff forever. And now Microsoft is officially confirming pretty much everything we've been talking about since as early as 2017. You know, it's been a long time coming, but it's finally happening. And I just am super happy about it. How are you?
Good. I do feel like sometimes we both, we get credit for this stuff, and sometimes we don't get credit for this, and maybe it's because we do pat ourselves on the back. Like I still like I was thinking about today because I got into a fight about some people on Twitter, not a fight, but a discussion about the new Galaxy Z Flip, whatever it is. It's a $1,400 flip phone. I do have one on order. It is coming Monday. I'm very excited. Yes, I will be reviewing it for this site, specifically to see how Microsoft software runs on it, including launcher and stuff. But I'm actually very excited about this phone. I mean, I'm so excited about it because I'm not a Samsung fan. If you heard me on this podcast before, I don't love Samsung's implementation of Android. So the question remains whether I can live with it. But it's a $1,400 phone, and that is not cheap. But I did write 2 years ago that $1,000 smartphones were coming, and I actually underestimated it because not only did $1,000 smartphones come, but now they're $1,400. You have a $2,000 Galaxy Fold.
Yeah, I do.
So I mean, I sort of like, and it's funny because at the time, people were telling me I was insane and no way that was going to happen, or if it did, no way would it catch on. And here we are. I'm fine with this stuff, by the way, because whatever. We'll talk about that again later on in the podcast. But yeah, the Windows 10X, big news this week. Microsoft held its developer day. And, we are expecting to hear more about 10X at Build, of course. But this was a really nice, I thought it was a well done event in the sense that it both hyped up the expectations and what 10X is, but at the same time, it's not like they flew media out to cover this, right. And they didn't have to deal with that sort of thing. But it was good. So we did get a lot of information about it. Why don't you try to sum up for us what Microsoft did at this event and what this emulator is and what it all means?
Sure. So Microsoft this week essentially sat developers down and explained what Windows 10X is, which is super important because as was said back in October when Windows 10X was first unveiled, Microsoft wants to bring developers along on the journey with Windows 10X. And that's important because Windows 10X is essentially a new operating system. I know Microsoft is describing it as an expression of Windows 10, but you and I know that underneath it's a whole new thing. It's based on Windows Core OS, and that's confirmed. You can go and check for yourself. There's sort of hints here and there that it is indeed a Windows Core product. And because of that, a lot changes under the hood. It's a reworking of the Windows operating system, but it's more than just under the hood. It's on the surface as well because of the new Windows shell, built on C shell, of course. It's much more adaptable. It's much more modern. It's entirely, all of the legacy components in the Windows shell have been taken out because it's been rebuilt with modern code. So what Microsoft described this week essentially to developers was how your apps run on Windows 10X and how you can adapt your existing apps to take advantage of dual screen PCs. That's not a requirement. That's just something developers can do if they want to take advantage of the ability to span and stuff. But otherwise, your app will more or less work just fine on Windows 10X. And that includes whether or not it's a Win32 program. And that's a really big deal. So what Microsoft did this week is explain how Win32 programs run on Windows 10X. And essentially, it's what we've been saying. They run in containers. They detailed the container in a little bit more detail. And what we learned is that essentially, when you run a Win32 program on Windows 10X, what happens is the OS spins up a VM or a container in the background of legacy Windows 10. Now, it's a stripped back version of Windows 10, of course. Like, it doesn't have things like the old classic shell or the start menu or any of that stuff. It's just there primarily to run your Win32 program and then place that app on the modern desktop or the host operating system, which is Windows 10X. And if you go and download the emulator, you can actually try that for yourself. Right now, Notepad's pre-installed, and if you launch it, you'll see that it takes a second or two at first, and then it places the Notepad, the app on the desktop. But then once you've loaded it once, it should load up pretty quickly every now and then, because once it's running, then that container is running until you close all Win32 programs, because all Win32 programs operate in the same container, because it is running in essentially legacy Windows 10, just stripped back when those programs are running.
Yeah, and just a quick note about that too, because there's a lot of interesting stuff around this technology. So for one, Windows 10X doesn't have a system tray anymore, at least not in the sense of Windows 10 that you see, where you see little apps running. And you know how everybody should know this, right? So when you launch Windows 10, sometimes like if you have a Razer product, it'll pop up and then it disappears and it goes to the system tray. That's where stuff sits that runs in the background. So that doesn't exist on 10X, which is part of the whole modern operating system, this idea that you shouldn't have to manage these types of things. That said, if you have a Win32 program that makes a call to do that, obviously it can't run there. That said, Microsoft apparently has built it so API and registry calls that access things that doesn't exist in 10X should not cause the program to crash or misbehave. Now, I say should because every time Microsoft says the way it should work versus how it works in reality is two different things, which is why the emulator is out there. But what it does mean, of course, is Win32 apps don't technically and can't run in the background. So when you minimize that window, resources get freed up again, which is nice. And if you bring up a Win32 application, resources then get devoted to it. In a sense, this should make performance better between when you use apps and when you're not using apps. Now, Microsoft also stated that this thing with not being able to run Win32 in the background may be an option. They're actually open to the idea that maybe they will give the user like a toggle, like, hey, let these apps run in the background, and they may allow that. They're not sure yet. So none of this stuff is written in stone. Again, this is why that emulator is out there, so they can get feedback from developers on how this stuff should run. So it is really interesting. And what's cool, this is what we've been talking about. It's a subsystem. This is Win32 abstracted away from the operating system. Yeah. They pulled it out, and it runs when needed. Otherwise, it doesn't run. So if you never run any Win32 apps, like this thing will just never be activated, and the OS is like more free, basically.
Yeah, if you're not running Win32 programs, what essentially is happening is you're running Windows 10 Mobile, but with a new user, a new user experience on top, because it is that modern stuff, and the legacy stuff is there in what I'm going to call a VM, because that's just the best way to explain it. Microsoft is very clear that it's not exactly a VM, it's a container, which means a whole bunch of different things. But when those Win32 programs aren't running, that VM is turned off. It's in hibernate mode, so it's not taking up any system resources or battery life or performance. Then when you launch a Win32 program, that's when that VM comes to life. That's when your Win32 program sits on the desktop. That's when you can interact with it. And even though it's in the container, it still talks to Windows 10X as if it were a native app. So you can do copy paste, saving into your actual documents folder and stuff. All of that works as you would expect. But again, like I said, the legacy program runs in the container and therefore is not affecting the main OS. That's the same for MSIX packages. MSIX packages, which already exist on Windows 10 today and already run in their own container, those will run within the Win32 container on Windows 10X. And then UWP apps, or PWAs, I guess, if you run them through Microsoft Edge, those will run natively on Windows 10X. Now, UWP apps also run in a container, but that's always been the case since, on Windows 10 today, UWP apps run in a container there as well. So that's not really news.
That's part of its security model. Right, that's exactly how it works. Yeah.
And it's so, I love this bit. When Microsoft described these three containers, they described it as the Win32 container, the MSIX container, and the native container. Guess which one's the native container? It's the UWP apps. I wonder why. It's because this is a UWP-based... I don't want to get into it again. It gets so annoyed, but we've been saying this since the beginning. Windows Core is all about the modern stuff. All the legacy stuff is gone. Win32, that entire thing is no longer core to the operating system. It's an addition now, and UWP is now front and center on this platform. That doesn't necessarily mean Microsoft is pushing UWP as the number one app platform for Windows 10X, which they're not.
Right.
But if you want to build an app that has the best performance, looks the best, feels the best on Windows 10X, you will build a UWP app, because that just makes the most sense.
Yeah, and that's a real key distinction that keeps getting lost here. So if you go through the dev materials for Windows 10X, UWP is everywhere in it. I mean, it's everywhere. They keep referring back to it. But you're right. UWP is not we're not saying there's going to be this next generation and all new apps coming out with UWP. I think clearly that's not the case. It goes back to the discussion we had 2 weeks ago where I asked, like, what app do you need on Windows 10, and this includes 10X, that you can't run today? Whether it's Win32, PWA, UWP, the web browser, like what is missing? And some people brought up some things, it was like the Kindle, a modern Kindle app. That's 100% I agree there. But for the most part, a lot of the stuff is already covered. So we're not expecting like a new wave of UWP apps from developers. That said, and you've been saying this for a while, that when, companies are going to start from scratch, they're like, all right, we're doing a new app, they do tend to sort of lean on UWP, and Adobe's done this with 2 new apps recently, which are UWP based, versus no company really is doing like, all right, we're going to do a brand new app. Let's start from scratch. Win32.
Right. Yeah.
And the reason for that is because Win32 dev is complicated. There's a lot of compromise. It's definitely not forward looking. I'd also question if you're a company these days, and this is also affects UWP. One reason why you wouldn't do UWP or Win32 if you're a company is because you're saying that, we need to do an app for a service or something like that. We're kicking off a new thing, and we want to make it cross-platform. And that's what's really drives a lot of development these days. So what's the easiest way to do cross-platform? Well, there's a couple, right? You can use the Marin Forms, there's WinForms, and these little bits out there. Of course, it's PWA, which we've been talking about for a while, is sort of becoming a bigger deal. And so what Microsoft is just saying is like, listen, here are all your options. They put a bunch of cards on the table. These are your dev options for Windows 10 or Windows 10X. Pick whatever works best for you. We like UWP if you want the native, what you're saying, native support, best for security, best for performance. It's the way forward. You don't want to do that, you can bring Win32. And, Win32 is still important in the sense that there's a lot of legacy Win32 apps, which are updated regularly, right? So those are maintained. So you get that support. But we also support everything in between. If you want to do hybrid, well, actually hybrid apps technically don't exist yet between Win32 and UWP.
And I have a feeling that's because they don't know where to put them. It's like, it's a Win32 program, but do we run it? But since it's also UWP, do we run it in the Win32 container, or does it run natively on the platform? I assume they just don't know where it falls right now, therefore that's why it's not compatible with the first version of Windows 10X, at least. They do say that will be coming in the future. On the subject of apps that might not work, there are some... But Microsoft isn't saying everything will just work. Obviously, there's a caveat there. Most things should work just fine. Some things won't. That's just based on sometimes maybe it'll be app compatibility. Other times it'll be Microsoft isn't allowing it. And the primary ones that Microsoft isn't going to allow to run on Windows 10X are apps that sort of modify the system, whether that be OS files specifically, or like partitioning hard drives. Those will not run on Windows 10X, and we'll get to why in a second. The other one is things like antivirus software. There's no real need for it on Windows 10X because it's such a lockdown platform, just like iPad, that's not necessary. There was another one. I cannot remember it now off the top of my head. What was the other? Oh, drivers. You cannot install like third-party drivers from the web and stuff. They have to go through Windows Update.
Yeah, it's drivers for an unsupported hardware. And it's like real edge cases, which I mean, I think that's every time you launch a new platform, edge cases are always going to be, and we're not talking about the browser, but those real, I have a printer from 8 years ago, there's like weird things that probably, might not be compatible, but none of that I don't think really matters. But yeah, I this design this operating system, and it was funny. We saw this a little bit on Twitter this week too. Someone, it was a developer, was like, "This is just kind of like Windows Mobile with Win32 support." Like, that's exactly it. And if you want to summarize this discussion right now, this is what this is. This is a new version of Windows Mobile with Win32 support. If that's how you want to think about it, that's a really good approach. Now, it doesn't really run on a phone,
No.
but we do know that there was a
It was
time
born out of
Microsoft
the
was going to
ashes.
put this
Yeah.
onto a phone.
Hmm.
And so it does technically have that ability should Microsoft down the road want to return to that. But as of right now, Microsoft is focusing on Android for its phone, and larger devices will be Windows 10. And so, like, I think this is a cool thing. But yeah, this is very, and another way to think about this. So, two ways. This is Windows Mobile with Win32 support. You can also think of this as a reverse kind of Windows. So, you have Windows 10. It's Win32 based, right? It's been around for 25 years. I'm talking the core, the kernel, a lot of the components in there have been around forever. It's Win32 based. It runs no problem with the x64 applications, of course, which started with Windows 7. So all that's there. It can also run UWP. And there's a good argument that UWP failed on that platform in the sense that I'm running right now the NV 32-inch, PC here. I don't use UWP apps as much as, say, the web browser or Win32 applications, but it could still totally run UWP apps, and I do run quite a few of them. Well, Windows 10X is kind of the reverse. It's a UWP operating system that happens to be able to run Win32. But make no mistake, Win32 is sort of like taking a little bit of a back seat here. Microsoft says performance should be close to native. They're more concerned not necessarily with you timing with a timer. They're more interested in perception. When you go to use it, does it feel slow? Does it feel fast? And to them, they say the performance should be very similar to native. But still, there's that question, right? This is going to be running in a virtualized. So there is technically a performance hint. Well, if Microsoft saw Win32 as the absolute future for its platform, it wouldn't be doing this, right?
Right,
It would have just
exactly.
put Win32 into Windows 10X, and it just would have been a new version of Windows 10, right? But
Yep.
that's not what this is. This is built for thin client devices, dual screen devices, what Microsoft likes to call new device experiences, which is a generic term, but it literally means anything that's cutting edge and hasn't been able to be done before. I don't know. I'm very excited about it. Now, you've been running the emulator. You've done a video on this kind of
Yep.
stuff. So tell us about the animations and how it feels and how it kind of compares to what we know today.
So because Microsoft has rebuilt the entire Windows shell with modern code, they've actually had the time to put effort into it, making it look nice, and feel nice as well, more importantly. So unlike Windows 10's current shell, which is a sort of mishmash of old stuff and new stuff, Windows 10X is all new, and they've been able to sort of from the ground up build the UI and the animations into it, and sort of really tweak it and tune it so it looks and feels nice when you use it. So there's animations almost everywhere. When the start menu comes up, it sort of slides up very nicely. App opens, it's got a nice animation that pulses onto the screen and stuff. The taskbar itself, it's all built out of, I believe, XAML now. It's a brand new taskbar. It's been rebuilt using modern code. So like it's all got fluid animations and stuff. When an app pops up on the taskbar, it pushes other icons out the way, and they can slide around and stuff. There's a new divider for pinned apps and running apps. Like Dan mentioned, the system tray is gone. It's now just the Action Center button that has a couple of icons in it that just for notifications and stuff. The Action Center itself has been visually redesigned. It's now visually separated. The quick actions are one box, and you've got your notifications in another box. And there's a brand new music control UI, which sits inside the Action Center, which looks very nice and modern and actually matches the rest of the Windows 10X aesthetic. And that's kind of a big deal here. Most of the UI is very much consistent here. This is a pre-release build, so there's some areas where right now, Windows 10X is at a point where it's trying to round off every box it can, but some boxes haven't hit that yet. So, there's minor things here and there, but the idea is that this will be a consistent Windows UI, which is something we've been asking for since forever. And the reason Microsoft can achieve this is because, like I said, they've got rid of the old Windows shell. The old Windows shell, which had those legacy components as well as modern ones in it. They've taken all the modern bits. They've redone it on Windows 10X and built everything else from scratch using modern code, so they can make it all consistent in one go. That's super important to me personally. I know not everybody cares about consistent UIs and stuff, but this is a big deal to me, and Microsoft is finally taking the step required to make that happen on Windows 10X. There's also it's C shell based as well, so that means it can adapt and change on the fly. And if you're running the emulator, there's a hidden debug menu you can access, which changes how like the taskbar looks and how whether it's thick or thin or hidden if you're running it in tablet mode and stuff. And that's all very important. Like there's a way you can I just hit my mic. There's a way you can sort of hide one of the screens in the emulator, so as if you're using it as a tablet. And when you do that, the entire shell sort of fluidly shifts over and realigns itself, just like you would expect it to, just like an iPad does. On Windows 10, if you were to try that, what would happen is the screen would go black, it'd flash for a second, then it'd come back, and it'll be where it's expected to be and stuff. But that's just a small thing where it happens whilst you can see it. All the elements move over, or slide over, or change places, and you can see it happen. That's just a nice fluid thing, and it really adds to the experience on Windows 10X. That said, this is an emulator, which means it's not going to run as well as it would on real hardware. Now, some people have installed it on actual hardware since it was released on Tuesday. I've seen it on a MacBook, I've seen it on a Surface Go, and I think I've seen it on a Dell laptop as well. And in every single case, if they've injected the graphics drivers, the animations are fluid, everything is performing very fast, and it's a modern platform. The best way to describe it is a minimalistic, lightweight version of Windows. And I absolutely love it. I'm actually in love with it.
Now, a couple of comments that people are making I just want to address. So one saying that, they'll believe the consistency question. They'll believe it when they see it. I mean, first of all, there's a lot of subjectivity here, I notice, on UI design, which is why I don't kind of care about it too much. I've seen people disagree over things that are, it's just subjective. I will say, it shouldn't be inconsistent because they started from scratch from the UI here.
I think what those people are referring to is that in apps, there's some inconsistencies. Like some dark mode apps are darker than others, which will still be the case. I'm talking specifically the Windows shell. The Windows shell elements are all consistent now. Like you won't run into a legacy Win32 pop-up, for example, like that came from Windows 95. That's not going to show up on Windows 10X. You won't find it. Control panel's not there. You won't find that either.
And that's exactly what we expect, because Windows 10 has a lot of old stuff in it. And I've made this analogy before. It's like having a really old house, and they've replaced the foundation, and now they're trying to keep the house alive, but they also have to replace major components on the inside. And some of it's more important than others. I know for some reason people get bothered by the control panel existing in Windows 10 versus just the settings thing. But a lot of stuff is like you have to go search for it. So I kind of don't care. It's there because it still serves a role for some people, a lot of times in IT including. But 10X is very different. The UI is completely built from scratch. But you're right. The apps aren't going to be consistent because that's what you all said. You don't want it consistent because you want Win32 support. Well, you can't run an app from 10 years ago and be like, why does it not have the Fluent Design System? Yeah, maybe that app isn't updated anymore. And you can't, what do you want them to do? Reskin a Win32 app? Which would just, we've been through skinning before, right? That was the whole thing with Windows Vista. And it just hits on performance. So I think it does look really nice. Even a lot of Apple people are commenting about how nice it looks and how kind of smart it operates in terms of scaling of apps and everything like that. So, but we're still early. This is still, it's not even beta, right? So there's still time. It's going to get more polish.
I just want to quickly talk about some other things Microsoft announced with Windows 10X this week. They also talked about some of the improvements to the operating system as a whole, since it's based on Windows Core. Now, Microsoft didn't once mention Windows Core by name, but we all know it's Windows Core. So because it is Windows Core, things like faster updates is a possibility. So Windows 10X features faster updates, and they sort of detailed how they expect feature updates once that update has been installed and is ready to reboot. That process should only take about 90 seconds or less than. I've seen internal documentation that says it can take actually under a minute sometimes. And the reason for this is because Windows Core products are, when the OS is laid out on a hard drive or an SSD or whatever, it's partitioned up. It's not like Windows 10 where it installs its entire self into one partition. Windows 10X is divided up into a whole bunch of different partitions. It has an operating system partition where the Windows files are to operate the operating system. Then you've got the user partition, which is where the user's files are. There's a programs partition where all your apps are installed and stuff. There's also a spare partition for the operating system, which is where it installs updates. So what is actually happening is when you install a Windows 10 feature update, Windows 10X will install that to the offline partition that you're not using, install it there and do everything it needs to do. And then when that update is done, Windows will say, hey, we need to restart to finish installing this update. And what will actually happen is the restart process just switches you from the partition you're currently using for the main OS to the offline partition, which has the new update installed. So all of your documents and programs don't get affected by this, which is why the reboot process doesn't take long at all, since they're just all in the same place and all of the updating has been done in the background, which is super nice. That's very similar to how Android does it and whatnot. The other reason I'm mentioning this is because of the state separation. That's what they call it. Windows 10X is state separated. Going back to how you can't run programs that affect system files and stuff, the operating system partition is read-only, just like on an iPad. You cannot just dive into the Windows folder or System32 and edit things in there. The user does not have access to that. File Explorer won't show it. And even if you find a way to break into the directory, you won't have the permissions to edit those files. And I'm sure maybe if you do some hacking around or jailbreak it or whatever, you will be able to do that. But by default, the user does not have those privileges. And that, again, that's by design. That's how Windows 10X is as secure it is. It's the state separation. It's how the user has access to its user partition and can do what it likes in there. But everywhere else, the system is read-only. No malware should be able to get in and affect things because everything runs within the user. The user only can do things in the user partition. That's great for security, bad for modders, as Drew Nielsen says in the chat there. But Windows 10X, and this is why Microsoft is very adamant that Windows 10X is for foldables and dual screen and new device experiences only right now, those sort of device types aren't really where modders are going to be. Gamers aren't going to be buying a Surface Neo, for example. That's not the kind of products for them. This is for new device experiences. And I am sure that Windows 10X, or at least a flavor of Windows 10X, will come to more traditional form factors in the future. I can guarantee it 100%. Windows Core is the future of Windows, and I expect to see it as on as many devices as Microsoft could possibly get it on in the future. And by future, I don't mean next year or the year. I'm talking 5-10 years. This is the future of Windows. This is the long game for Microsoft, because it is so much better as an operating system from the core up.
And that's really important to point out. I mean, we're talking years, 5-10 years out. I mean, not that I wouldn't be surprised if in late 2021 we're talking about laptop classic clamshells running on
only on
new
new
silicon
devices. The other thing there is this will never be offered as an update to existing Windows 10 users because the operating systems aren't compatible. Windows Core is so different from Windows 10 that Microsoft can't issue it via Windows Update and just apply it to your current install. That's just that would be way too much work to do, which is why you can only get Windows 10X on new devices, because the state separation stuff, it's just easier to install there. And like I said, like Dan said, in 2021, 2022, we'll probably see Dell and Microsoft come out with actual more like traditional laptops with Windows 10X or a version of Windows Core.
Yeah, and the reason I think, why we're seeing dual screen devices, one, it's a way to reinvigorate the market. There's that article we wrote 2 years ago talking about that. Like, listen, 2-in-1s are kind of done now. They're an established category. They don't have anything left to prove, which is why Surface Pro basically evolves, but doesn't have revolutions every time. So this is a way for Microsoft and its partners to help sort of kickstart and energize the PC market again. Be like, all right, let's do something different now. Let's try this dual screen approach. And it's clear they thought it out, right? What's really neat about what you see in 10X, it's like it doesn't feel gimmicky. It actually feels like, oh, they really thought about how all this stuff is supposed to work. And they flat out say, listen, not all apps need to basically leverage 2 screens. That's fine. But where it makes sense, you may want to consider doing that to your app. And someone brought up, so does this run Steam and games from the Windows Store? Yeah, I mean, it should. There's no reason why. I mean, I was going to say, but now this is based on, we're talking about hardware limitations, right? I mean, the Surface Neo is not a gaming laptop. It's performance. We don't know yet because it's running on new Intel Silicon, but I imagine it's going to be similar to, like what the Qualcomm 8CX is performing when it runs native ARM. So it'll be good performance, but these are like thin client devices. They're not going to be huge. So you're not going to be able to run like. I would be more interested in game streaming than I would be like the latest 64-bit game.
Here's what I will say regarding that. So because of how Win32 runs on Windows 10X, I don't think, even if it was running on hardware with like a dedicated graphics card stuff, I don't think you'll be able to play games through the container because it uses RDP, which isn't, unless Microsoft has done some magic behind the scenes to make that way more, native to the operating system. Running through RDP, I don't think you can do it. Maybe you can, like I said, I'm not too sure. But where this could happen is through GameCore, which GameCore, for those who don't know, is sort of the version of Windows Core, which isn't exactly right, but the version of Windows Core Microsoft is building for game devs, so that they can build games cross-compatible with Xbox and Windows 10. Game Core is compatible with Windows Core, so you could have Game Core plug into Windows 10X, and if a developer has built a game on Game Core, that should also run on Windows 10X, assuming you're on a device that has the specs to run that game. Now, Game Core is, if developers adopt it, that's one scenario. If they don't adopt it, then streaming will be sort of the solution there, I think. But yeah, I don't expect Windows 10 Pro, like existing Windows 10, is sticking around. It's never going away. It will always be there for enterprises, power users, and gamers. This will be where gamers want to stay. I would not recommend a Windows Core or Windows 10X device to a gamer. I just wouldn't.
You're right. Yeah, this is like, I'm going to just flat out say, like, if you don't like the idea of the Surface Pro X, like, Surface Neo is going to be very similar in terms of the compromises that will exist there. You have a Surface Pro X, by the way, now, too. I should point out we have 4 people on the Windows Central team that have a weird Surface Pro X. Yeah. And so it's not just me, folks. And my best friend uses the Surface Pro X. So wow. It's
the worst bit about the Surface Pro X is the fact that it's not available in Surface Gray, or the platinum color that they make.
Platinum.
I love that color. So all of my other Surface products are that color except my Pro X, and I hate it.
Yeah. But like with the Pro X, there's caveats, and it's not for everyone. It's a perfect device for you, for me, for when we're traveling and we're working. But yeah, it's not the device where you're like, oh, can I play, Battlefront on it, right? It's not meant for that. But game streaming actually does solve that problem. And game streaming, we do know, is coming to Windows. Speaking of, let's quickly mention, we didn't add it to the show notes, but iOS xCloud, Project xCloud started this week. Very limited test. There is some issue here with Apple, which is Apple is not a fan of having stores and other subsystems running within. I know GeForce Now, NVIDIA's solution, we asked them, like, what's the deal with iOS support? And you're like, ask Apple. And we've seen this before with Steam and everything like that. So Microsoft's walking a fine line here trying to get this done, but it's available. It's only 10,000 users are able to test it due to the limitations of Test Flight that booked up quickly, and you can only play Halo Reach or the Halo Master Chief Collection at first. But it's coming along. But we also expect, as you say, Project xCloud for Windows 10 sometime, I imagine, next few months. And I'm excited about that. I'm sure Zach is too, because that means we could put it on the Surface Pro X and then, game on that device. And it's something actually GeForce Now is a 64-bit app, so it doesn't actually run on the Surface Pro X. So this is where Microsoft favors its own system a little bit better. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. As you mentioned, 10X is the future of Windows. Someone's asking whether it be a server type SKU for 10X. That gets back to not 10X, but gets back to Windows Core, which is handled by the Azure team anyway. That same technology is going to be used in systems, but there won't be like a 10X server version. But yeah, we should expect in a couple of years this gets pushed out of the devices. I think you and I talked about this 2 podcasts ago. Surface Go 3, we're not even at 2 yet, but Surface Go 3 running Windows 10X, maybe on ARM.
That's my dream device right there.
That's the dream device, but we're talking, I would imagine, late 2021 for that to happen. So, there's no ARM support here yet for 10X. They have enough things they're juggling with containers and containers within containers.
It's a lot of work. There's a PowerPoint slide in one of the presentations they did where they're like, here's how the container works. It's all these arrows and pointing, things. But that looks pretty complicated.
It's
just you lot can run your legacy programs. God damn it.
Right. Yeah, I almost feel like, I do want to kind of sit down with some of the people on the team, just be like, so how long have you guys been working on this?
I've been wanting to do this forever. I've talked to so many people at Microsoft. I'm like, can we just do like something like an official Windows Core thing? You talk to me, I talk to you. We lay it all out on the table, because we've been following this Windows Core thing forever, and it's so cool, and nobody at Microsoft wants to talk about it publicly anyway. It's so stupid.
I think it's about wording. They don't want to spook people, because there is obviously a lot of confusion. I mean, one of the reasons why they're doing the dual screen thing is. And they keep saying it's only for dual screens. And we know that's not true, but they're doing that for messaging because they want it to be so different that you're not going to be like, oh, so my desktop is going to get 10x. It's like, right. No, it's just this new crazy ass device that's coming out sometime next year, or this year, with dual screens. Those are the only ones that'll have it, and you have to buy that to get it.
And they also don't want people to think that they're being left behind, because Windows 10 isn't ever going to get 10X or Windows Core, even though Windows Core and 10X are the future. That is arguably the better platform. Windows 10 is still around and is still on many devices and will be for a long, long time. So it would be weird for Microsoft to come and go, here's Windows 10X. It's the future on everything. And then, if you've got a Windows 10 device today, you're not getting this ever. They would.
And we should mention that, the 10X features, the UI stuff, some of it will trickle back up to Windows 10.
That's true. So you won't get the benefits of like the state separation or any of the under the hood stuff. Not really. Bits of it here and there maybe, but otherwise Windows 10 legacy will always be legacy Windows 10. It will always have those legacy components in it. But on the surface level, the shell level, you might start seeing bits and pieces of Windows 10 make their way to Windows 10X, make their way to Windows 10. Things like maybe the new Start menu or the new Action Center, and that's because that sort of stuff is modular and it can be cross platforms. We've already seen the Start menu and the Action Center on desktop in that leaks build that came out last year. I think it was now. About half a year ago. It was running on that internal build on desktop. So it's very, very possible. And I actually think the fast ring this year will be used for that. Microsoft will be using the fast ring to sort of test Windows 10X bits here and there, on the shell layer at least. And maybe without the intention of ever shipping them on desktop. Maybe it'll just be a thing that fast ring users can test. Because Microsoft made that change to the fast ring earlier this year, where they're like, so the fast ring isn't for actual, releases anymore. It's just whatever we want to throw in there, we can throw in there, and we can pull it at any time. They could very easily put the new Start menu in there for 6 months and go, well, thanks for testing it. Now it's on Windows 10X, and you're not getting it. They could do that if they really want.
Just a couple other things to mention. So is Windows 10X not good for gaming, or specifically the Surface Neo? You can't separate those two things right now. You really need to associate 10X with Surface Neo and other foldable devices like the ThinkPad X1 Fold, which will ship with actual full Windows 10, but gets 10X later.
I would say version 1 probably not great for gamers. There's probably the TLDR there.
But there's two things here. One, the OS, they're building it right now for productivity and dual screen functionality, not for gamers, right? This isn't for Alienware devices. Two, the Surface Neo hardware the thing is stupid thin. Like, it is really, really thin. And I know no one here, except for me, okay, I'm over again, has got to hold it on their hands, but it's a very thin device. And part of this is because it uses Intel Lakefield, which is their new chipset. Also has very thin LCDs, but this thing is meant for mobility and having really two big displays in there. So you could, in theory, put 10X on something with a Core i9 and maybe a graphics card. I don't know if graphics card even work with it yet because of the drivers, but it could in theory, right? And then it would be an amazing, super good experience. But that's not where they are right now. So maybe down the road, they could absolutely build 10X into a gaming laptop, put in a serious graphics card, put in Game Core, as Zach was talking about earlier, and make a really thin, light, powerful native gaming experience. Or not native gaming experience, but gaming experience. That could happen. We don't know if that's the plan. But again, we're getting way too far ahead here of where we're at. They just want to focus on dual screen, light, thin client computing, new device experiences, and getting that out the door. But if you think about this for 2, 5, and 10 years, all of these possibilities are out there. But we got to see how game streaming is going to really change everything. Because I think there'll still always be a need for people who want a localized gaming computer that does things local for graphics. And you put a big beefy, RTX 2080 in there. And then there are going to be a lot of people, a lot of consumers who are like, I kind of want the portability of a Nintendo Switch, but the large screen of a Surface Neo. Where's my device? And that's where Microsoft could come in with game streaming and all this technology. So the point is that you really need to think about this is it's modularity. It's about this idea of having all these components, and Microsoft can now assemble them where they need to. Just like someone asked earlier, can you remove the Win32 subsystem? The question kind of doesn't make sense. And yeah, you could remove it to save storage space. I mean, you can't, right? There's no way you can actually remove it.
Microsoft can.
Microsoft can.
Yeah.
In fact, that's what we had expected for what is now the Surface Duo would have been. I don't think they would have put a Win32 subsystem in that. It just would have been Windows Mobile, right?
Yeah.
But so they could, because it's a modular system, so they could, and all they would have done then was save storage space. Because from what we know, when that container isn't running, it's not using any resources.
That's right. Yep.
And so it doesn't. That's why I say it doesn't make sense if you're talking like Surface Neo. Like, could you remove it? The only thing you gain back is some storage space, but you wouldn't get any performance back.
And because of the legacy version of Windows 10 they have inside the container is so stripped back anyway, it's not that big. It's not as big as a normal Windows 10 install, and that's by design, of course. So like on a device like Surface Neo, which I assume will come with at least 128 gig, 256 maybe, it's only a small amount of storage that it doesn't really matter. Like. Yeah, you're right, Dan. Like, there's no need to pull the Win32 stuff out of Windows 10X because if you're not using it, then it's not affecting you anyway. It's just taking up a bit of storage, which isn't, let's just think of it as part of the OS. It doesn't matter. So, Real quick, so that's pretty much all the big stuff around Windows 10X. Microsoft did tell us that they will be talking more about Windows 10X at Build, and they'll also be doing a more consumer-focused Windows 10X sort of, I guess, launch or something in September, October time. So, like, the event this week was very much developer-orientated, so if you were just a normal person interested in Windows 10X, you probably didn't understand most of it. But they will definitely be doing a more sort of consumer-facing, here's all the new features of Windows 10X. Here's all the new app experiences. That sort of thing will be coming later in the year, as expected. Microsoft did also talk about Surface Duo a little bit. Talked about how you can use Xamarin to build one app that sort of works across both Android and Windows 10. How dual screens works there as well. And they also showcased Surface Duo officially for the first time. I don't know if you noticed, but when they announced Surface Duo in October, Panos never used it on stage. He sort of just held it out and showed everybody and then put it back in his pocket. There was not at any point did he touch it or interact with it on stage. And that was.
And when I got to hold it, I could. The OS wasn't on. We weren't able to.
Exactly. Yeah. And even when he was in London here a week or so after the October event, he also didn't really play with it there either. He sort of just had it and showed people. And I'm assuming that's because there was a lot of issues around drivers and touch and all that stuff on the Surface Duo back then. This week,
which still exists,
right? So this week they actually showed off the Surface Duo and they actually did a demo with live code for the first time, and the demo failed not once but twice. Now we won't get too much into that because it is pre-release and fine, whatever. It's just really funny because in the last week's podcast, I was like, I'm actually pretty confident now that Surface Duo is coming early. And then
because we know it's dog fooding, right? And so that was another story that came out this week, which was we saw a photo of someone in Vancouver.
That was last week,
I think it was.
But yes.
Yeah, last week. And it was someone was just using it in the public. And this lines up with what you're reporting. You said that, they're giving this to employees now for take home. And that's how, so Surface, for those of you who don't know how they do testing, they do internalized testing. And when it's real prototype level, they never leave the building. They don't even leave certain rooms. Then they go to another level where certain employees can sign out for the device and they have to basically sign something and all this kind of stuff. Then even then, I don't think they can use it in public. And now we're at the level where apparently they can use it in public. Although this guy wasn't too keen on being caught using it in public.
No, sure. I mean, you wouldn't. So I actually sort of asked a few people about that. So the Surface Duo is in take-home status. Lots of people at Microsoft, I say lots, there's people at Microsoft have them now if they're working on experiences for the Surface Duo, not just the hardware teams. So you get to sort of dog food the device, and you're allowed to use it in public. Apparently in the NDA you signed, it's like, you can use it as a normal phone, use it on trains. We need you to test it. Just don't show it. Just don't give it to anyone. Don't let people hold it and play with it and stuff. You can use it, but you can't sort of publicly show it off and stuff, which is fine. So I don't think I assume the guy on the train didn't get in much trouble because he was just doing as what Microsoft said he's allowed to do. The problem is that prototype had a front-facing flash in it, which wasn't on the original prototypes that we saw back in October. And this makes sense. If the Surface Duo doesn't have a rear-facing camera, it needs that front-facing camera is the only sensor, and it will need a flash to accompany it. So that makes sense. But yeah, the demo failed. It looked more like a Microsoft launch problem rather than a hardware problem. The hardware looks to be pretty much done. And I am still hearing that Surface Duo might launch before the summer. I think that sort of blip in the demo was, again, like I said, software in the launcher, which can easily be fixed. So yeah, I'm still expecting Surface Duo to rock up, maybe in time for build. That'd be nice.
That would be nice. I don't want to get my hopes up though.
No, I mean,
but
don't buy your build ticket assuming you'll be able to buy one, because I don't know if you will.
I mean, hey, a year ago we were talking about the Duo coming out back when it was called Andromeda, getting our hopes up. But at least here we are, a year later, and it's real. We've held it, we've seen it. It's a reality. So this stuff is coming within months, which is, it's pretty wild. We're heading to crazy times. I just want to quickly mention too, Galaxy Z Flip came out this week, and this will head into our Mobile World Congress discussion. So Samsung actually used to be really big at Mobile World Congress, and then like a lot of companies, they started doing their own event at Mobile World Congress at a separate building, and now they're like, we'll just do it a week earlier from Mobile World Congress. And the reason for that is because they get to control the message, and they get to control the event a lot easier. And so they held their Unpacked event, and I usually don't cover Samsung's Unpacked stuff too much unless there's like a PC there. And there wasn't this week, although I should mention Galaxy Book S, the Windows 10 on ARM device, finally went on sale yesterday. So that's really nice. Now, some people are like, Samsung doesn't seem to be, really too into that device. I don't think it's that, because both IFA and CES, they actually had huge stands with 30 of them, and they had them all out on display, and you can go try it, and it wasn't hidden in the back corner somewhere. No, they actually had a pretty big thing. My contention is I believe Qualcomm is having production limitations, and I've mentioned this before. The Pro X have this problem too, where if you wanted specifically the 16 gig version, like you would have to wait 2-3 weeks to get the order for that, and that's not suggesting, because they're selling out so much. It just means I think it's really tight supply. And I think because Microsoft came in with the Pro X, I think it knocked Samsung back a little bit, because it's basically the same chip that's being used. And I think there's still supply constraints. And we kind of heard Microsoft talk about this on its earnings call, where it talked about basically certain problems in trying to deliver, because they had very good numbers for Surface for the last quarter, but it was actually below their expectations. Yeah. And I think a lot of that's the chip stuff. I don't think they were able to ship. But I will be getting a review unit in. So even I haven't gotten one of those, which, again, reflects the Pro X. We didn't get a review unit because Microsoft themselves had so few versions or ones to give out. But yeah, Galaxy Book S, you can go get it now, $1,000. Wait for my review, though, if you're interested. It's a traditional laptop, right? It's a laptop with Windows 10 on ARM, but it should be fun. Galaxy Z Flip. You have a Galaxy Fold.
I do.
We're just talking about before the podcast and trying to get you to sell it because you want the Z Flip, or trying to resist.
I really want I'm trying to resist it though, because the Surface Duo is coming. It's like I don't need the Flip and the Duo, but I really want the Flip. I really want it.
So quickly, the Z Flip is a $1,400 phone. This is really interesting, because this gets back to our larger Fold discussion. A lot of people are like, what's the point of folds? So you have a Galaxy Fold. The Galaxy Fold this is how you have to think about it. It's a tablet that folds into a phone, that's something phone size that can fit in your pocket. The Z Flip is different. It's a phone that gets smaller and fits in your pocket. And so that's what's the benefit there. And trust me, it's a significant difference, because it's a tall display too. But yeah, versus a candy bar thing that fits in your pocket versus something that folds up into, the size of your palm that fits in your pocket.
I love this idea, but I've seen so many people going, I don't see the point. It's a stupid idea.
I don't get that. How do you not get?
Like, it's just so dull-minded, because you've got to think there's so many people out there, specifically women, who have non-existent pockets, basically. This is the kind of product that will work really well for them. It's not just you,
And I'm going to also say this, like, as someone who, I keep talking about the Surface Pro X being my favorite device, is because I do so much work on it when I'm traveling, or I'm just out, or I'm on the couch. So the work I'm doing on that device now is the kind of work a lot of people do on larger smartphones, including like my Mate 20X. So if you just want one device, you tend to buy that one big, powerful smartphone, which in this case would be the new Galaxy S20 Ultra, right? That has everything.
Ridiculous phone, by the way.
Yeah, that thing is super heavy. It's dense. It's big, but it's a powerhouse, right? So if you just want one device, that's you. I carry two devices though, because ultimately I want a full keyboard and I love the Pro X, the large display. That's how I work. So for me, having a big smartphone now is becoming less important. I mean, here, I'll hold this up here. It's not on right now, but this is that, I don't forget what's it called, the Light Phone 2.
Oh, you've got one.
I do have one. It's not great, but it's an interesting concept, right? This idea of like, if you rely like me on a Pro X, like you can kind of have this interest in stuff like this, right? This idea of minimizing and going back to a smaller phone. So the Galaxy Z Flip, I like this idea of like, it's a powerful phone, but it folds into something small, fits in my pocket, and I don't use it as much because that's how my smartphone usage has actually been going recently. Yeah. That said, quickly, it's a Snapdragon 855 Plus processor, so it's not even the latest one, but it's still a very good one. It has dual 12 megapixel rear-facing cameras, one wide, one ultra-wide, which I really like. Again, they didn't screw it up like Google and put a zoom in a regular. They put a ultra-wide, which is the way you're supposed to do it. It's got a really nice, I think, 10 megapixel front-facing camera. Yeah, and then it's got the big thing about this, and I can't drive this home enough. It's a folding glass display.
Right.
Like for people who are complaining about plastic and all that, and listen, those were legit trade-offs. I just wrote about that 2 weeks ago. But we went from 4 months ago talking about the Galaxy Folds display, concerns over there, although they solved most of that, but still it's plastic, to now we have literally folding glass, which is something Corning's been working on for a while. And it's just like, that happened in 4 months. Like this stuff is moving. And this is why, by the way, it's so expensive. People are like, why is it $1,400? Like Samsung invested millions to make these two devices. They're not just going to they're going to try to recoup those costs because they know they don't need to mass sell this. They have the whole S20 line to mass sell. But yeah, it's got a 3,300 milliamp battery, not huge, not tiny, but it should be okay. Fast charging. It has Qi wireless charging, which is cool, and a small display on the outside. I got the purple version. It arrives Monday. I'm very excited. I don't get excited over phones, but yeah, and Mr. Mobile, Michael Fisher's the same way. He thinks the S20 Ultra is boring. He said its design is so blah.
Oh yeah, I agree. I also think it's actually kind of ugly. I think like the back of the phone, especially the Ultra, looks hideous in my opinion.
Yeah. I don't. Again, if you gave me an Ultra, I'd be fine with it. Like,
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, yeah.
No, but I'm saying like the look doesn't bother me because I'd be looking at the display the whole time, right? So I don't. But I get where Fisher's main argument, which him and I are on the same page on this, is like foldables are exciting. It's like. Even though I'm taking sort of like it because the Z Flip costs as much as the Ultra, which has 5G, has way more RAM, has way better cameras, a better display, like 120 hertz display. Like everything about the Ultra just kicks the snot out of it. And yet I still look at the Z Flip and like, yeah, but that's the one I want. For one, the Z Flip specs are good enough for what I need.
I'd say they're actually great. They're flagship tier specs, more or less. They're maybe
late
last
2019 flagship.
Yeah. They're last year's flagship processor, but the 855 is no slouch. It's more than good enough. In fact, I have a feeling the Surface Duo will be an 855 device. I'm not going to be knocking it anytime soon. The 855 is fine.
Listen, if your reporting is right and it's coming out earlier than expected, the 855 makes sense. If it's coming out like November, then that's weird.
You're right. Yeah, 100%.
So. But yeah, I'm excited about this. It's a new form factor. The size looks great. Yeah, it's expensive. I mean, but listen, I wrote that article a couple weeks ago. Early adopters. We put our money on the line. This is what we do. Like, we want to pay for something now. We're willing to risk and have trade-offs for that new experience. So I'm very excited about this phone. That said, and I said this at the beginning of the podcast, I don't love Samsung's implementation of Android. It's been getting better.
It has been getting better. I used to hate Samsung's Android as well. It's now at a point in which I don't mind it.
That's where I think. That's where I'm hoping to be, right? Yeah. Like for me, OnePlus, Huawei, Honor still do a much better job in terms of Android and its experience and skinning and all that. But I'm hoping, and my expectations are, the Samsung's implementation is just like you said, good enough. Like I'll be okay with it because I think I'm going to love the hardware. I think it's whether or not the software I love, but. I'll be doing coverage over that for the next couple of weeks. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you want to follow that process and ask me questions. But listen, you combine that with, the ThinkPad X1 Fold coming out this summer, and we have Surface Neo and Duo coming out. Like, this is some wild times we're living in. Plus, we have this folding glass now. Like, I don't think people are appreciating just like how crazy that is, and how within a year we have now like there's at least 4 folding phones on the market.
My New Year's resolution is so stupid. My New Year's resolution this year was to never use a slab phone ever again. So I've got.
There's going to be a point that they do feel antiquated, right? It's going to feel
like
weird.
How flip phones used to be antiquated, and now they're like, now it's the future again, which I actually don't mind. Like, because again, all of these people are saying, I don't understand the point of a flip phone. Like, how old were these people in 2005, 2006? When flip phones were it. That was, if you didn't have a flip phone, you were a loser. Like we've done this before. What goes around comes around. This is the exact same thing. We've gone from static sort of form factors that don't move around and stuff, to flip phones, and then we went to sort of static sort of form factor in the form of smartphone slabs, back to flip phones. It's a cycle that will never end. Okay.
Yep. And for people complaining about the price, like I said, it's fine. Don't buy the $1,400 phone. I'm not advocating people do that. What I am saying though is, in 2 years, this technology will be standardized, and your $800 phone will be foldable. Like, because if you're a Samsung, if you're LG, if you're Microsoft, your goal is to lower costs as much as possible. They're not stupid. They're not like, we're going to only $1,400. That's it. We'll never go below that, because we'll have the customer meet us here. They know there's a huge market for 800 and lower market. I mean, that's just the way smartphones work. That's what drove Android to be so popular, and what actually helped the Windows Phone for a long time. These companies do want to drive down the price as much as possible, and who can get there first will benefit. If you're Samsung, I guarantee you they're like, we're going to be the first to hit $800 for a foldable. They absolutely want to hit that goal because they're going to make up for it in volume. But due to mass production, due to how new this technology is, due to how there's a lot of questions about reliability, you don't want to mass market this and like sell it for super cheap and cut corners. So it's cool. Just appreciate where we are in history right now for technology, and in 2 or 3 years reflect back on it, because this is game-changing stuff, folks. Like,
see, there's someone in the comments literally asking, why do you need to fold your phone like an old flip phone? Just save space. That's the point of a folding of smartphone. It's because it's smaller when you're not using it.
Did people like object permeability and everything? Did not people understand how like?
Well, I've seen people talking about like the Galaxy Fold. Like, why do you want a tablet that fits in your pocket? Well, because it has more screen. If I could do more on the. That's the whole point. The whole point of a folding phone in any form, whether it's a folding phone or a folding tablet, is more screen or more compact. It's one or the other. That's the number one selling point for folding anything. Okay, that is it. If that doesn't appeal to you, then you don't buy a folding device. That's simple.
It's the same reason. Like I said, the iPhone 11, the regular one, I thought it was kind of the perfect size. It was the size I wouldn't go bigger than this anymore. That's the reason why I didn't get the Pro version. The Pro was just way too big, even for me putting it in my front pocket. And listen, like when I wear dress pants, they don't have big front pockets either, and I carry a phone in there, and it's just like if I could make this smaller but still get a big screen, that's all I want in life, and that's what they're fondly delivering. And this question of like, why do you need anything for technology?
Do you really need a smartphone?
It's nonsense. Yeah, because do you really need? Like, you could actually argue you do need a smartphone now, but back in 2007. You could be like, you don't need a smartphone. Yeah, you don't need that. But all technology, you don't need a 4K TV. You don't need an 8K one. You don't need a flat screen TV either. You could still be running a tube one if you want it. Like, technology isn't about need. It's about new experiences, and it's about creating new opportunities. And a lot of our technology isn't necessarily about, revolutionary changes. It's about small things that makes our lives easier. And so none of us needed curved screens on smartphones. That didn't really solve anything. It just made it nicer looking. Same with like thinner bezels. It doesn't solve anything outside just making it nicer looking, right? But that's still important. No one needed thin bezels. Your apps still ran the same. You still had Google Maps. Uber still worked, right? It was pure aesthetics. And same with the whole notch thing, which lasted again a year, right? I don't know. This stuff is fun. That's why I don't get into the whole technology thing about what was it, looking for solving a problem that no one had or something. It's like,
This is looking for a problem that doesn't exist. It's like,
yeah,
stop it. Stop
yeah,
it.
that's all technology is this, right? I mean, I don't know. It's funny. Anyway, and plus all you're going to eat your words because I guarantee you in 2 to 4 years, almost every smartphone will have folding abilities and you'll be weird if you have a slab
I can't wait for the
phone.
sliders to come back. I want a slider phone.
Sliders. Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, so look for our coverage on folding stuff, including the Z Flip in the coming days and weeks. We're getting a little long here in the podcast. So let's quickly, Sony pricing issue. Oh yeah, Mobile World Congress was canceled. I just want to talk about that as I was talking about Samsung. Mobile World Congress happens every year, end of February, Barcelona, Spain. It's the world's largest mobile conference, which has been primarily smartphones, but now it's been coming back to Lenovo was going to be there this year. They had some laptop-y stuff there because as, you know, especially the things I cover is mobile computing, right? Mobile computing is now mobile. 5G laptops, 5G devices, all that. So all that was happening at the show. It's the world's largest. 109,000 people come there. $500 million to the Barcelona economy. 14,000 temporary jobs created to support it, and it was canceled. The reason being the coronavirus in China, which a lot of this is paranoia. Some of it is also, I think, just valid concerns. If you're a company sending, 50 to 100 employees to this to do your booths and everything like that, your insurance has to cover those employees. And if those employees happen to get sick, it's a kind of a big deal. I'd also say putting 109,000 people into small halls and, waiting in line in close proximity while there's an outbreak
from all over the world.
From all over the world is risky. Like there's a better than average chance something could spread there, even if it's just the flu. And so, but what happened was some companies, big name companies, Amazon, AT&T, started pulling out, and it caused a cascading effect. It's like, oh, they pulled out. Like, should we pull out? And then journalists and media started going like, do we need to actually go to this thing now because they're not there? And it just started cascading. And then the GSMA, who puts on the event, were hoping Barcelona could declare a health emergency. In which case insurance would have kicked in and sort of saved everybody. And then the mayor of Barcelona was like, no, we're not doing that. It's fine. Like, just show up. Because, as I mentioned, 14,000 jobs, $500 million of money, a lot riding on that city. And my heart goes out to all the vendors and people that are in that city who were banking on this for income. And it's just not happening. So the event got canceled. It's still scheduled to go on next year, 2021. Don't feel bad for Sony and Microsoft and Amazon. Those companies can literally afford to send people across the world, get their message out, do events. Feel bad for the startups and the tiny companies who really do true innovation, who rely on having these small booths and journalists and other tech people walking around, discovering them, and then making deals there for that technology to get into your new devices. That's how all this stuff happens. It's. I know everybody looks at Mobile World Congress as like, oh, here's a new phone and someone on stage and little flashes. Like, that's part of it. The other part of Mobile World Congress is all the deals that happen in the background with all the 5G and the networks and all that, who go there, find this new technology, make deals, and discover stuff. This is the reason why the Surface team is at CES every year. And, I saw them this year again, walking around in little groups. They literally go and they find these small companies who are like, hey, we did this thing with an antenna. And Panos would be like, that's interesting. We could probably use that. And that's where those things happen. So big deal. Unfortunate it's happened, but it's the time we live in. This coronavirus thing is, affecting all sorts of stuff, including China and supply issues for technologies.
Yeah, now obviously that means Microsoft's planned MWC event has been cancelled as well. They say that they're going to announce whatever they were going to announce at some point in the future. We wasn't expecting anything huge anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, if you were looking forward to Microsoft's event on the 23rd, that's not happening now.
Yeah, and we weren't expecting big news from Microsoft, but there could have been some bits there. Zach and I were going to be there. Poor Zach. That was going to be his first World Congress.
Yeah,
first
if you want to feel sorry for anyone, feel sorry for me.
Yes. I'm just glad because Barcelona is fun, but like I said, I don't like going to a city with 109,000 people. I don't get to experience Barcelona. Plus, I have a thing with AMD this week coming up, which I'm excited about. That was going to overlap. But Yeah. So, but there'll be more news, and some of the companies will be announcing stuff. So don't worry there. And real quickly related to that, Sony pricing issues. So the reason I bring this up, this is in relation to Xbox Series X, the latest console coming out later this year. Story came out from Bloomberg Technology, pretty reliable source, saying that Sony's having a significant problem here sourcing DRAM. So DRAM is used for storage solutions. Think of it as a temporary cache. It's very fast, but it's also temporary. So memory isn't persistent there. So when it loses power, it's gone, right? But DRAM is used everywhere. It's used in smartphones, smartwatches. It's used in laptops. It's used in gaming consoles. It's used in cars these days for infotainment systems and navigation stuff. It's basically everything that's electronic. And only 3 companies control DRAM: Samsung, and I forgot the other 2 now. It's off the top of my head, but it's a very tight supply market. Samsung with its S20, and that's the other thing with smartphones. They're using more and more of this stuff, right? It's like now you have devices with 12 and 16 gigabytes of RAM. And so Sony apparently is having a problem with sourcing enough of this stuff, and the prices have been going up. And it's causing, they've already locked into the hardware for the PlayStation 5. And now the prices have gone up, and they can't rework it. Their cooling solution apparently is also more expensive than usual for a console. And so this apparently is causing a crunch. Now, when you have this problem arise, you have a couple options. You can jack the price up of the device, or Sony could eat the costs. Neither one of those are a good option. If you jack the price up, you risk then, if your goal was to undercut Microsoft, well, you just threw that out the window. If your goal was to meet Microsoft, well, now you're more expensive. We don't know how that's going to play out. If you're just going to eat the cost, you avoid that problem. But it's kind of hard if you're in charge of the PlayStation program to go back to your bosses at Sony and be like, oh, we didn't make any money off of all of this, even though we spent millions of dollars making it. But hopefully we'll make up for it in services and game revenue. That's also a big risk. And that's something Microsoft, I don't think, will do, because I don't think Nadella would tolerate that. So that's where Sony is right now. That's a big report. Does that affect the Series X? I don't think so. We're not hearing the same alarm bells for Xbox. There was a report out on January 22nd saying that actually the Series X may not use DRAM for storage. It has this new solution that's out there. It's real cutting edge. I have an article come out today that links to it, and you can read it there. But if that's true, then that's how they're skirting around this issue of DRAM and tight supply chains and pricing, which that's some good thinking on Microsoft's part then. But so far, we're not hearing that. We still have no idea what the Series X is going to be priced at. All consideration says it's not going to be cheap. And that they're not trying to be like super low cut. But, we also heard Sony was basically like waiting to see what Microsoft price is and then respond. And we've also talked about how there's supposed to be 2 Xbox new series, right? Anaconda and Lockhart. And maybe one of them was a cheaper version. Right. So if Sony goes, we're $200 cheaper, Microsoft will go, oh, we have this other thing too. We don't know. So it's really interesting, though, to see how this all plays out. It's going to be, this affects all components. Everything these days is connected. So this is a bigger deal than I would say Sony, but we'll have to see how Microsoft kind of navigates through it as well.
I mean, this is a problem for Sony because gamers are so sensitive when it comes to price. Like the reason the Xbox One failed was because it was $100 more than the PlayStation 4 at launch, and that's because it had the Kinect bundle and stuff. But that's not the point. Gamers saw that it was $100 more and didn't buy it because of that. They could save $100. That's 2 games or a game, plus a bunch of like gift cards that you can spend on the online store. That's why the PlayStation 4 ultimately beat out the Xbox at first, and then it just kept going with exclusives and stuff. So it's important that Sony doesn't price the PlayStation 5 too high. If it's more expensive than the Series X, then that's a huge problem for Sony. If it's less expensive than the Series X, that's fine. But Microsoft needs to come out with something that undercuts the PlayStation 5 even further than that, and that's what Lockhart's supposed to be, right? If you have Series X at $499 or $449, whatever, the PlayStation 5 can come in at $399. Then Microsoft can have something that undercuts that by $100 at $299. Then that could be the Xbox Series S or whatever. It can run all the Series X games, but at $299. The $499 product will be for the hardcore gamers who want the most power and stuff. Then the $299 model will be for everybody else, just like how the PlayStation 5 will be for everybody. That's what Microsoft needs there.
It's so funny too because we're just talking about smartphones, $1,400, 2,000. Like someone asked me today, like, yeah, but what's the ceiling on smartphones? How high they could go? I'm like, who cares? Like, the market determines that. Like, if Samsung came out and it's like, here's a $2,500 phone and no one bought it, well, there's your ceiling.
Yeah.
If a bunch of people do buy it, well, guess what? But it's funny how the game console market absolutely is the opposite of that. Like, you can go like $299, yes. $399, $450. Like, you're crazy. No one's going to pay for it. It's like, holy cow! Like, that is not a lot of margin to get off, right? Like, you're talking like if it's $50 and $75 difference, people are going to like be like, oh my God, the Series X is way better than PlayStation because it's $75 cheaper, or vice versa, right? So it's like, it's just funny how much more, and because of that, they're trying to beat each other in terms of performance and everything like that. But that $75, that's not insignificant. Like, you look at laptops, $75 can get you some pretty significant upgrades, right?
I really think Microsoft should eat the cost of the Xbox Series X and sell it for less than the PS5. Only because I know Microsoft doesn't care about hardware no more. Well, that's not really the point. The point is the ecosystem. If you can get people into the ecosystem by selling a console, by losing money on the hardware, but then getting that money back via the services, I think that's a strategy. I don't know if it's a good one, but it could be how Microsoft beats PlayStation in the next generation.
But that's how. I mean, there's precedence there, right? That's how Microsoft did the original Xbox.
Exactly. They sold it at a loss.
That said, I'd be shocked if Nadella would sign off on that.
Right, because the Xbox is already hemorrhaging money as is.
Yeah.
It's not making money. It's actually losing money for Microsoft.
You have to do a lot of fancy napkin math to make that happen.
Right.
And if it's off, like, you're going to screw everything, right? It's sort of like, if that plan doesn't work,
but if
you don't sell it.
That's money for days.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I don't think that'll happen. But it sounds like Phil Spencer and that team have really thought about the hardware. We did see, people have been wondering on the back where the ports are. There's like a slot there, and people are like, what's that for? Oh, is that for the new Kinect? It's like, no. It turns out the CF Express slot, which is, a lot of people don't know this. It's what actually I use in my camera. I have a Nikon Z6. Think of it as a combination of a SD card as well as a CF card, which are bigger and stuff like that. So it's bigger, it's more robust, it's sturdier, it's more weatherproof, but it's also very fast. It's very fast. This is next gen stuff. It's very expensive right now. It's basically the cost of an SSD, but you get 2,000, I think, megabytes per second read speeds on this thing. So, which is like 4 times what an SD card would get. I think it's even more than that. I forgot the speeds, but an SD card's actually slow. So let's get to the whole expense of memory in a console. Like, we know the Series X has an internal SSD. And that's a big deal because the previous version had a hard disk drive, and it's not good. Switching to SSD is going to really, really make the Series X much faster. But it's also not expandable. You get a terabyte, right? And that's it. But with the solution on the back, you're not just doing a USB expansion, right? Which, yeah, you can do that now. You can throw a 2 terabyte or 4 terabyte expansion on your Xbox, but you're taking a huge performance hit when you do that. This is going to basically give you native performance with this expansion. It won't be cheap at first, but like SD cards, everything, it'll come down in price. But this is a real forward-looking solution. This is something like in 4 years, you're going to be still glad your device has, because you're going to be able to put another terabyte or 500 megabytes or 500 gigabytes on and get really, really fast performance out of your device. So I'm very excited about that. But Microsoft really seems to have thought about this whole thing. But we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a really interesting question when both companies unveil the pricing, where that goes.
I have a feeling the PS5...
it'll be cheaper.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. And I really hope not. Maybe if Microsoft just matches the PS5, that'd be a big deal. But
yeah.
I just don't think they will, unfortunately. Do you want to quickly talk about the Spotimo thing before we sign off?
Sure. Spotimo is a third-party. Sorry, my voice is getting all dried out here. Spotimo is a third-party app on the Windows Store, Microsoft Store. Sorry, it's for Spotify. It's based off of the website. It uses UWP as its main app development. So it has a lot of fluent design. It's very nice looking. It's mostly stable. It does have a couple bugs here and there, but it's also basically in development. And so they got a cease and desist from Spotify because of the name Spotamo. And I feel for both sides here. If you're Spotify, you can't make exceptions on copyright claims, right? You can't be like, well, those guys are kind of nice. Well, we'll just let that slide. Because as soon as you start doing that, it undercuts and undermines your argument for your copyright on your name and your logo. And so apparently and we've seen this before. There's another Spotify app that went through the same thing. Xpotify was one. And is that what it's called now? Now it's called Expo Music, but what's called Xpotify. They couldn't do that, so now it's called Expo Music and has like a different logo. And so we don't know the status here. I'm hoping they change their logo and their name, and Spotify goes away. But that we don't know. So it's under threat from being removed from the store. This has happened in the past with Instagram and other companies. It's what happens. It's unfortunate. We'll try to keep you posted. We do have a story up on the site focusing on it. So we'll try to follow that up and see what's going on. So, yeah, they also claim the logo. Yeah, I mean, this is their lawyers, right? This is what happens. They need to protect their copyright. It sucks. But like I said, they can't make the exception here because if they do that, then it undercuts everything else. So. And my voice is really.
Yeah, you've talked it to death.
I did. I had to make up. Yeah, last week, by the way, I was in Jamaica for a week. I got to still post some photos of that, but amazing time. Shout out to Jamaica. If you ever can go there, absolutely do it. Amazing people, amazing island, really good food, and I had a really good time at the beach, and it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to go back, actually. But yeah. So anyway. Let me clear up my voice there. All right, that wraps it up for this week's podcast. You can follow me at Daniel_Rubino, Rubino, and follow Zach as ZACBOWDEN on Twitter. We're going to do some live Q&A now. I'll mostly have Zach do it since I'm apparently can't talk. But you can always join us Fridays, 2:30 p.m. Eastern time on mixer.com/Windows Central or our YouTube channel. Watch us live, ask us questions. Otherwise, we'll catch you next week. Thanks for listening. Take care, everyone.
And scene. So yes, if you have questions, we're going to hang around for a little bit and answer them. We'll try to answer them as best we can, but we don't always know everything. As hard as that may be to believe.
What?
If there are any questions, that is. Surface Laptop 3 or Surface Book 3. Those are two very different products.
Yeah.
If you're somebody who just uses Office and browses the web and checks email, Surface Laptop 3. If you're somebody who likes to do a little bit of gaming, some video rendering, Photoshop work, a little bit more graphic intensive stuff, Surface Book 3.
It also depends on gaming. I do use my laptop 3 for gaming. I do a lot of platformers, 2D scrollers, those kind of first-person AAA shooters, obviously. But those games play really, the platformers and stuff like that play really great on the new hardware.
Is 10X 10 Lite? Windows 10X is what we were originally referring to as Windows Lite. Windows Lite was its internal code name. Yes, so Windows 10X is what Windows Lite has become.
What I have Windows XP behind him. That's the box that Microsoft sent me with the sweater.
It's a cool box.
It is a cool box.
What do you guys do with all the devices that you guys receive? For me, it depends. If it's a device that was sent via the company who made it, and they don't want it back, I'll keep hold of it for a while, then eventually give it to a family member or something if they want it. I never sell them because I'm always worried that they'll eventually ask for it back.
Right.
If it's a device I buy, then I'll eventually sell it off.
Same. A lot of the companies do ask for their hardware back, and so I have to send it back. Dell, I send Dell and Razer stuff always goes back to them. So HP mostly, I get to use some of it. They let me hold on to it for longer. They're like, you can hold it for a little while longer. And that's mostly because I continue doing updates and coverage of it. Like I'm still using the NV32 because I prefer it. But also when stuff comes out about it, I like to kind of write about it, and it just helps me. But same with the Surface stuff. I still have a couple old Surfaces laying around just to, people, I need to verify something. But yeah.
Will Microsoft ever release a mobile phone that runs Windows Core but is not foldable? On a
We
technical
never heard
level,
this question.
it's on a technical level, it's possible, but I don't think Microsoft will anytime soon. There's no plans to do that.
Thoughts on the specs, alleged specs for Surface Book 3 and Go 2. Go back to the podcast 2 weeks ago. We talked extensively about that. And none of that news is new. Zach and I are kind of both like, meh. I guess I'm more interested in sort of general improvements. I would argue, the book, outside of the necessity of popping the screen off and how useful that is, I think the book is basically, the design is fine. Like, I don't really need a major design. The hardware improvements, okay, sure. And same with Go 2. We don't expect Go 2's overall design to change. I'm still hoping that they thin out the bezels and by doing that, put in a slightly larger display. And if they can improve the performance, maybe offer a Core M3 version. I'd still prefer ARM, but I mean, it's okay. But go listen to that podcast. We talk a lot about it.
What do you guys make of the failed Duo demo? Watch the stream. Not sure if you guys covered it already. We covered it a bit. I don't think it matters. I'm still hearing the Duo will launch early, then Holiday 2020. It looked more like a Microsoft launcher problem than a general device problem, which is easily fixable. The software's not supposed to be done till April anyway, so plenty of time. Telephony, Windows 10 X, not that I know of. What is the end goal of the Surface Pro X? Is this the future for Surface Pro devices? In regards to the form factor, I believe yes. I believe that design is a peek into what Microsoft expects Surface Pro to look like going forward. Regarding the architecture, it depends. There's always going to be need for Intel or AMD. But ARM is very much for much more lightweight computing, in my opinion. And I always think there's always a market for lightweight computing. That's why Windows 10 X exists in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, the Pro X exists because that design is something they wanted to do, but couldn't do with the Intel system currently. Now, Intel systems will improve, so eventually they could achieve something like the Pro X actual design. I'm talking about the actual thinness of it, right? But within that point, in theory, Qualcomm's will be even smaller and thinner too, and they can do even more crazy stuff. But there's two goals with the Pro X. One is, we've seen this internally. They reference it as what they call it, processor. I forgot what the word was. But Microsoft is purposefully giving AMD and Qualcomm a chance to boost them up in the ecosystem so that other OEMs and consumers are aware that these options exist out there, because Microsoft fundamentally believes that competition between all these companies is the best solution for the market. So there's that, which I think we all agree on, and I keep saying that. It's dumb to take a position on this. You could be like, I don't need ARM or I don't like it for myself, but you should be very excited about ARM devices because it helps put pressure on Intel. There's that. Then there's also the fact that this chip allowed Microsoft to create a device that they otherwise could not create with existing Intel hardware. And that's cool because now we get something that pushes off into a slightly different direction. So that's why all this stuff kind of exists out there.
Hang on. Let me just read. This is a long thing here. Hang on. So the HoloLens is on sale, but only to enterprise and enthusiasts until the platform becomes viable for consumers, both in price and user experience. Don't see why Microsoft couldn't take the same approach with the Duo. It would show the commitment to Windows 10 X and UWP, whereas now there is a bit of a mixed messaging. Microsoft should try to court Android developers and not encourage them to simply enhance their app, because that benefits Google and their entire Android ecosystem. Windows 10 X on the Duo is a more compelling argument for UWP, etc. Microsoft should be thinking long term, especially since Windows 10 X can run any Windows app. So here's where this idea falls down. Developers don't want to build UWP apps right now. So Duo can't exist. As simple as. If you want Microsoft to make a phone, it has to run Android. And also, Microsoft doesn't really care too much about the platform when it comes to that sort of thing anymore. Microsoft is more focused on bringing a platform that makes sense for the form factor and then enhancing that. Windows 10 X still works without Duo, without it being a phone platform. It's fine. It's doing what it needs to do without it being a phone platform. Maybe in 5-10 years, when more UWP apps are a thing, or PWAs is what I'm more thinking of here, then perhaps a phone running Windows makes more sense, but not until then. You can talk about how good the platform is all you want. If it doesn't have the apps, it's not going to work. And the Surface Duo itself is already a very niche product that's not going to sell in large quantities. The Duo running Windows 10X will not convince developers to build UWP apps for it. It's much more likely a developer will adapt their app that already exists on Android for it because it already exists, you know?
Let's also don't forget that, HoloLens falling back to enterprise. That was, and I say falling back because when HoloLens was first announced, they didn't know how to position it. There was gaming, it was consumer, it was enterprise. It was art, it was engineering. Like they threw it all out there. If you go back to that original presentation, and when you talk to Microsoft, they're like, yeah, we don't really know yet. We're trying to get it out to some developers' hands to see what they go with it. Turns out they saw a lot of interest from enterprise, and that's where HoloLens has eventually found a nice little comfy zone, is sitting with enterprise. And Microsoft's making big deals with big companies for buying these headsets and using them. So there's money being exchanged there. In fact, when HoloLens 2 went on sale, they said they already became like back ordered basically because there's so much interest. So that's a safe space. Now with 10X, they put it on the phone. You say the same model, go back and, I guess maybe enterprise will buy it or something like that. Microsoft tried that. Go back to 2016 and 2017. Our reporting there, specifically to Lumia 650, my reporting on that said Microsoft was purposely going after enterprise. That's what the Elite X3 was. The Elite X3 was a whole play. HP was like, this is meant for business and enterprise. If consumers want to buy it, cool. But they were really aiming at enterprise. So that's where Microsoft eventually fell back with Windows Phone to find like a nice comfy area where it could live and thrive for a few years and then maybe expand later to consumer if it got big again. Well, guess what happened? Enterprise did not bite. And because there was no massive enterprise support for Windows Phone went away because then there was no way for a consumer there. So the idea of putting 10X on the phone and going and retreating to the the enterprise space, it's not going to work for the same reason, which is those apps. People expect to have a phone that they can use for work and for pleasure. And if you can't do both, don't even bother trying. And it goes back to what Zach was saying with the apps.
Is the Duo a 4G or 5G device? The prototypes that are currently in testing are 4G, and I expect that will be the case at launch. I do not expect 5G.
I asked about 5G, and they're clearly experimenting with 5G. I bet there are 5G prototypes. But my guess is it's going to launch with 4G.
If it's an 855, it will be a 4G device. If it's an 865, then it has to be a 5G device, but I don't think it is. Why isn't Microsoft pushing UWP as much as they used to now that they have a UWP first OS? Even the Office apps are now PWA instead of the awesome UWP apps they had. Regarding Office, I agree Office is a weird one. The UWP Office apps are amazing, but the PWAs are more feature-filled. And the PWAs using React Native can basically be native UWP apps, so I'm not too bothered about that. Regarding third parties, it's because developers just don't want to update existing apps. Most Windows programs are Win32, and it's not fair to expect a developer to rebuild their entire app in UWP. That said, I keep saying this, in the future, if you're a developer building a new app from the ground up, you're likely going to choose UWP or PWA. You're not going to want to build a Win32 program in 2025, 2026 from the ground up for Windows 10X. It just wouldn't be, why would you do that?
Again, I keep seeing this spread up. The case for Windows 10X on the Surface Duo, Microsoft said it's not a phone. False. I don't know why people keep saying this. I've posted Panos' quote many times. You can go back and watch his presentation. I'll actually, as I'm talking, I'll bring up the actual quote here because I was just going to use it the other day.
Yeah, I've seen this as well. And the reason why a lot of people think this as well is because internally, and Microsoft, when it was Andromeda at least, were very much like, we don't want this to be we want this to be more than a phone. But it's always been more than a phone. Like, I believe when we first started talking about it, it was like, yeah, they don't want to market it as a phone. They don't want to be like, oh yeah, for smartphone. But that's still the case today. They don't want to compete with the iPhone or Samsung. That's not what the Surface Duo is for. But it is a phone.
Let's go back to the quote. I have it here. This is Panos now during the presentation. I want to be super clear about this. You're going to talk about this as a phone, and I get that. And you're going to talk about this as a communication device. And it does both of those things incredibly well, for sure. For sure, you can text, you can write, you can do what you want. But make no mistake, This product is a Surface.
There you
All
go.
he's doing is just distinguishing this device from a regular phone.
It's called
Exactly what,
marketing.
yeah, it's marketing. It's exactly what Zach said. It's a phone, but it can do more than being a phone,
Yes.
too.
It's exactly what
That's,
we've been saying since the beginning when Andromeda, and we first started talking about that. It was
yes,
like, it is a phone, it does phone stuff, but Microsoft wants to market it as more than a phone. But it
right.
is still a
So,
phone.
but they're not saying it's not a phone. Get that out of your head, and please stop saying this because they've never said that. And they will admit it's a phone. It's absolutely a phone. It's just a phone that does
Yeah, at a
more
ground
and
level,
does
it's a
something unique.
phone, and then it's all the experiences on top of that that Microsoft is trying to sell you. And that's the key part of Surface Duo. That's why Android is so important for the Surface Duo. Without Android, Surface Duo can't exist.
Right.
Android is the sole reason why we even have the dual screen phone from Microsoft that we've been talking about for so long. We should be thanking Google.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, Zach and I have been both on record. Yeah. Ideally, it would have 10x, and him and I could definitely get by. We'd make it work with UWPs and PWAs. We'd somehow convince ourselves this is kind of neat, right? But as a commercial product, it can't succeed like that, and that's all that matters here. And let's just be
Sorry.
and let's just be. I was just going to say we should be grateful because we know this device has been in work for 4 years at least. It's Panos is like main. We have, from what we understand, one of his passion projects he's been working on and wanting to release for a long time. And there was, for a while there, a chance that this device would never see the light of day. And given the choice between it not coming out at all or coming out with Android, and those are really the only two choices you have to think about that way. There was really no choice to go with this with Windows in 2020. I'm going to take it with Android, and we'll just go from there. Yeah.
Someone's saying PWAs can't be React Native. So what I mean is, you can take a web app, like the new calendar preview, for example. It's based on the calendar website. They've taken it, they put it into UWP, they've built it out of React Native. But you can, a PWA can't be React Native, but you can build an app with React Native that was based on a website.
What do you think about Microsoft is going to do with the future of Xbox after xCloud? Will they go the cloud gaming route completely? So, cloud is super important. Everybody's very excited about it. But a couple things. It's going to be a couple of years before it catches on and goes mainstream. A lot of the bugs get worked out. There's going to be a lot of focus on latency. Don't forget, game streaming has nothing to do with competitive gaming right now, which is one of the biggest areas of gaming. So all that stuff still needs to evolve and improve over time. I'll also say that data caps are a legit thing, even for people here in the United States, where people's ISPs are like, you only get a couple gigs a month, and that's going to affect that stuff. There's mobile too, right? I mean, you can't stream a AAA title onto a laptop if you're on the airplane or, in a place with bad reception. And then there's emerging markets and places where they don't have the infrastructure to do high-speed data, rates for streaming. So there's going to be a need for localized console gaming for the next, I imagine, at least 5 to 8 years. There could be a period down the road where that phases out, but Microsoft is positioned to go either route and keep either route going so long as the market, responds to it. If consoles drop out and people aren't buying them because they're doing just streaming, then that's where they will go. But they don't have to do either right now.
With 5G starting to roll out in some locations, when will we see the first Surface device with built-in always connected using the high-speed tech?
I don't know about Surface, but Lenovo already has the what's basically the Yoga C640 coming out, which is a sequel to the C630, coming out in the next few months. That is a Windows 10 on ARM device that runs a Snapdragon 8CX and has 5G built into it. We've covered it before. It was called Project Limitless. I still don't know if it has an actual name to it. And so that's going to be your first 5G always connected Qualcomm device coming out literally in the next few months. It should be out before June. And we see how Microsoft does with this stuff. Microsoft is funny because they usually are a few generations behind. Yeah, I mean, even ARM, right? They let everybody else do ARM, and then 2 years later they came out with the Pro X. But I think we could argue the Pro X is well worth that wait, right? I'm sure they'll do 5G when it makes sense. I wouldn't imagine. I mean, the Pro X2, I could imagine, would definitely be 5G.
Someone's asking, have you heard anything about Microsoft apps missing from the Duo, like Bing Maps and Movies and TV? It doesn't have Bing Maps, doesn't have Movies and TV. It has the Google Play Store for Movies and TV, and it has Google Maps for Maps. I know it's going to be a disappointment to a lot of people, but that's the nature of building an Android phone. With the Play Store, you have to bundle a whole bunch of Google apps, including Gmail, Chrome, YouTube. There's another one, Maps, and there is another one as well. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I think it might be Duo or something. I can't remember.
I really want the Movies and TV.
They were building one, but as far as I'm aware, those plans are not happening now. Maybe they are for the Duo, but as far as I'm aware.
It's interesting because at least if you're in the US, the kind of solution around this is there's a Movies Anywhere
which
app.
Which is what I think is why they stopped making the app, yeah.
Yeah.
Bing Maps was never an app. Well, there was a Maps app, which sort of uses Bing Maps on Windows. That's what people are asking for. Will there be an app built into the Duo that uses Bing's Maps? And the answer, as far as I'm aware, is no.
Should I buy a Dell XPS 15 2019 as a university student, also for video editing? Yeah, absolutely. XPS 15 is a awesome device. Gets great battery life, amazing display, and you can configure it to be very powerful, including upgrading to 64 gigs of RAM should you require it. Yeah, I mean, if you're doing video editing, yeah, it's a great machine for that. It's a better value than a Surface Book, I'll say that.
Do you think Microsoft has to fix the Tux interaction shortcomings on Edge for the new devices to succeed, or do they not care about polish? I don't think Edge's UI is going to be the deciding factor as to whether or not these new devices succeed or not. I've used Edge with the touchscreen. It works fine. I can't pinpoint to an area where it falls short. It would be nice if when you scrolled, the sort of the Chrome UI sort of faded away or like moved up a bit like it does on iPad, but otherwise it works fine. Yeah, I do not expect Edge's shortcomings around touch interaction to be the life or death of Windows 10X or any fold or touchscreen device.
With Windows 10X being important for Microsoft, do you think that the Surface Neo Duo initial success will determine the release cadence for annual releases, i.e. next version already in development, or more aligned with the conservative approach? Question. I think they're pretty conservative in general.
The problem is they can't be conservative when it comes to the phone.
I was going to say
that has to be a yearly release.
Yeah, that changes. So that seems like Yeah, that's a real tough pickle, right? Because when you commit to that, that's aggressive.
If Microsoft wants to build a phone, they have to keep up because the smartphone market move. You can get away with it on a laptop. You can do like a year and a half, 2 years, but on a phone, if you miss out on a year, that's a lot of innovation that you're missing out on. You know, you got to have a yearly release for this phone.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely true.
All right, a couple more questions, I think.
The next XPS 15 is going to be a massive upgrade. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that. I don't know what their plans are. Dell's been definitely moving towards 16 by 10 displays. It'll be interesting if they do that in a 15-inch. But I honestly don't know. Speaking of, I'm still reviewing the LG Gram 17, which has a 16 by 10 display, and that's pretty awesome. 1610 by 10 nanometer CPU, larger trackpad. The 10 nanometer CPU is interesting but I don't know what that means. By that I mean the XPS 15 already has one of the largest batteries you can put in a laptop. So they can't put a larger battery in there, which is sort of its strength. They could, I guess, reduce the battery while still maintaining that good battery life and making the device thinner and lighter, which is probably what they may want to do. Then they got to worry about thermals too. Larger trackpad. I mean, the trackpad's always been good on the XPS 15.
Does the Duo have something like Samsung DeX? We don't know. Microsoft hasn't confirmed.
I don't think so.
Yeah, me neither. It would be nice because it would make sense.
Because we asked about Continuum with Windows 10X, and there's no Continuum there.
No, because what it is it's not Continuum, but it's like a Windows laptop. If you plug in the Surface Neo to an external display, it will display, an extended Windows screen where you can run apps on it and stuff.
Yeah.
It's not going to say no, you can't extend the device. You can absolutely extend it.
Right.
On the Duo, I feel like since it's a Surface, Continuum or some form of DeX sort of like software would make sense. But it would be really cool if that was just you boot into Windows 10X. That's how it's a Windows device.
That would be amazing. That would be the dream.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to
No,
happen,
me neither.
but because all that makes
I can
sense.
dream, and I will dream. Do you feel like Microsoft might launch multiple versions of the Surface Neo, like a version with a weaker CPU, example Snapdragon 765, less RAM and/or storage? I don't think the CPU will change, but I definitely think you'll have different RAM options and storage options.
RAM and
for
storage,
sure.
yeah, because that's the easiest way to
Yeah.
hit a certain price
I
point.
also think,
Apple's very good at this. It's
yeah,
like you can get one for $799,
but it has
but the one
12
you
gigs of storage.
yeah, the one you really want though is 1,000.
Yeah, I
But they
have a
get to
feeling they will do it for the Duo. I have a feeling the entry level will be 6 gigs, 64 gig storage, which isn't a lot. So
nope.
you'll want to do the 8 gig one, 28 gig one if they do.
Will Microsoft do an actual revamp of Windows 10 in a major update? Fluent Design is not a revamp. No. Now Windows 10 will only get, I can imagine, minor UI tweaks, and we'll see things maybe get
Over
replaced.
time it will get bits and pieces, but there's not going to be one release that introduces the entire WinXU experience.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Why? Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say over a long, like what you're saying, over 3 years, with you add up all these little small changes, it'll be a big change, but it won't be a single update.
Why is Bing Maps still on Windows 10 if it's not going to be on Duo? Because Windows still needs a native Maps app. That's why. And Google doesn't want to build a Google Maps app for Windows. And Microsoft wouldn't want to bundle that with Windows because Windows is still Microsoft's. And look, I'm not saying for sure that the Duo won't have a Bing Maps app. I'm just saying that as far as I'm aware, it doesn't. It does. I haven't seen the app. I've seen a lot of the Surface Duo internally. I've not seen a Bing Map app. Which of the two devices are you personally most excited about, the Neo or Duo? I wasn't more excited about the Duo until this week, and now I've seen Windows 10X and stuff. I actually really am excited about 10X. So,
Yeah, it's funny. I think we're more interested in the OS than the
oh,
hardware.
for sure, 1000%, yeah.
Yeah. But that said, with Neo, Neo's it's a mystery box, right? No one knows. No one knows what it's like to use that thin of a device with glass dual displays and a keyboard. Like, I don't know. It doesn't have 4G, which, from what I understand, that's the case. It doesn't have LTE, which for me is a deal killer because that would make it way more useful. And in that sense, the Pro X for me will probably be still my go-to device. But I'm interested in hell in trying this thing out. Especially, I think the experience of using dual screens with a physical keyboard, again, that Wonderbar thing with the emoji, I being able to ink on the second screen. I think that's like super cool. Like that sounds like a really interesting new way of computing that I'm interested in trying. So I'm not here to say I'm convinced it's going to be the way for me to do computing, but I'm definitely intrigued by it. I think it does offer some new opportunities. So
Microsoft is all over the place with their developer story. They need to just double down on UWP and Windows 10X, let devs know they're serious. I don't think they are all over the place. I think it's very clear. If you're building a new app, you use UWP. If you have an existing app, maintain it with Win32. And maybe update bits and pieces of it with UWP. That's the developer story. If you're building a new app, Microsoft wants you to use UWP or PWA. Doesn't matter. Like use the modern sort of ways of doing an app. Don't build a Win32 program. The entire reason why Win32 is containerized in Windows 10X is because of this. It's a fallback. It's there to support existing programs, not there for new apps. Okay, the UWP is 100% the future of Windows app development. The problem is there a future for Windows PC app development in general? That's the question. It's not about Windows. It's about is there a market for new app experiences on PCs? I think there's an argument to say there isn't. All of that sort of innovation happens on mobile now. And I know that's a reason why the Duo should run Windows 10X, but there's the primary reason why it can't is because it's a cat and mouse game there. Developers won't build for it because not many people will have one. Simple as. Right. I think that's pretty much it. I'm not seeing any more questions. Someone's asking about telephony in Windows Next again. Since it's Windows Core, Microsoft can add and remove telephony if they want. But Microsoft doesn't want to make a phone running Windows 10X. That's why they're not doing it. Otherwise, they'd do it. There's no reason. The market doesn't want it. That's the problem. The market is happy with Windows on PCs, like the Surface Neo. The market doesn't want Windows on a phone. They just don't. And the people who do, that's the minority, and very much so. Do you know that the Surface, the Windows 10X and Surface Duo petition on change.org only has less than 5,000 signatures? But there's 5,000 people is nothing compared to the billions of Android users. It's not a lot of people. Will Windows 10X have the Your Phone app? Of course it will. Of course. And it'll be great.
That's the other interesting thing about the Galaxy Z Flip is I finally get to try Your Phone. Being on the iPhone.
Oh yeah, you've missed out on that. That's old news, mate.
Yep. I mean, I know it exists. I have Android phones, but because of different SIMs, I don't use it that way. Yeah, and I went back to my Fitbit this week, which was just more of a coincidence. I just wanted to try the new SPO2 sensor, which still doesn't work, or I'm not getting a report on it. But and by the end of the week, it turns out that was probably a good move since I can't use Apple Watch with Android. Lame. It's funny. And the Fitbit's all right. But Apple Watch really did spoil me.
Yeah, I sold my Apple Watch today.
How dare you?
Yeah. I like the Samsung Galaxy Watch. It's really nice. The Active Watch. It's really nice. Why does Microsoft keep using the 10 in Windows? Apple dropped it already. I'm sure Windows will drop it eventually as well. It's because the reason is because Microsoft has other versions of Windows that are still in support. People are still using Windows 7. People are still using Windows 8. So they need Windows 10 to differentiate it. Once everybody's running Windows 10, I'm sure they'll drop it.
That and doing a search for I need help with Windows versus I need help with Windows 10 will give you very different results.
Yeah, Mac OS is very much a one thing.
Yeah.
But Windows is a very generic term.
And Zach and I know this because we all get pitches for actual Windows in our email from companies that want to sell us Windows. Yeah, it's a true story.
Microsoft has sold the Galaxy Z Flip with their launcher and apps pre-installed for enterprise. So the Galaxy Z Flip does come with some Microsoft apps pre-installed. That's part of the Samsung Microsoft deal. It will come with Outlook, I believe, Your Phone integration. There's another one in there. I think LinkedIn is pre-installed.
Yes.
And I think Office is pre-installed as well. Skype, I think, might be one. But no, they won't do the Microsoft launcher because Samsung has its own Microsoft launcher that they like very much.
I love going on LinkedIn at 3 a.m. and shit posting.
Yeah. All right. I think that's pretty much it. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll be back next weekend. Right, Dan? You're back on Friday, aren't you?
Yes. Cool. I'll be back.
Till then, until next time.
Later, people.